started, I would say, with cartoons, really. Because when I was younger, my brother would always try to scare me. He's 7 years older than me. So he would always try to scare me. So I tried my best to stay away from horror movies as much as I possibly could as a child because of him. And eventually it came to a point where I really started gravitating towards more of the Halloween episodes of like cartoons like Hey Arnold, The Simpsons, so on and so forth. And when I would gravitate towards those, I just, for some reason, just started having a real appreciation for it. When those came out, I was like 6 when Scream came out, and I was maybe 10 or something like that, or maybe 9 when Blair Witch came out. And Blair Witch is probably the most memorable horror movie for me. Like that, I just remember every aspect of seeing the missing person posters everywhere at Blockbuster and Hollywood Video and things like that. And it was my true introduction into horror. And eventually, when so I say I grew up in the 90s, but in reality, I really grew up in the 2000s. Like that's when I really had my shaping and forming years, right? So for me, most of the horror films that I got introduced to were films from the 2000s, which a lot of people may think are probably the worst horror sets, which I disagree. I think we got some of the best horror in the 2000s. So, I mean, without the 2000s, we wouldn't have had anything from French Extremity films and things like that. But that's what I was really, truly introduced to trying to see where I can push myself to.
So kind of how did that get started? What kind of made you decide, I guess also then how you met your co-host as well, decide that not only what you could and you wanted to talk about horror movies for hours, but that it was something you knew people were going to want to listen to?
It's a great question. You know, I started Nightlight back in 2019. We launched our first episode on Halloween. But the official idea of Nightlight came about around, I want to say maybe January of 2019, something like that. And maybe even the year prior. But at the time I worked at Apple, and I had a group of friends who also were obviously working at the same company that I was working at. And when I was working there, I kind of had this idea of really wanting to do something in media. I didn't know what it was yet. It wasn't horror right away, even though that was my main jam. It really focused on like video games and stuff like that. And we actually made the company Good Night, which is kind of, I guess, the umbrella for Nightlight. But with Good Night, we made our first podcast, which was just the Good Night podcast, and that eventually transitioned to something called the Good Night Movie Club. And from there, I was like, I want something more honed in. I want something more niche. I want something that is more of a reflection of myself versus just me being the movie guy or whatever. I like movies and I like film, but I really, really like horror. And I really think that horror is probably it's the stepchild that nobody wants, you know, and I'm like, I want the stepchild. So, you know, so I came up with Nightlight, talked to one of my co-hosts at the time, who said it was a very bad idea. And, you know, it made me think about it, where they wanted us to get Good Night Movie Club really going and really finding its footing and things like that, because it was having a hard time. I would say like we would maybe get like 200 listeners a month or something like that, which for us was pretty cool that 200 people in a month wanted to listen to us. But for that time frame, we were just wondering like, okay, well, what's next for this? If it doesn't meet that, do we just stop, put pen to paper, rewrote the show a few times? Actually, I rewrote Nightlight about 15 times, and it was very different from what it is today. Instead of us talking about film, we were more so talking about topics, and which we did end up taking that idea, and now we have that as an exclusive show for our patrons called Midnight Hour. So it was something we still wanted to do and wanted to kind of be able to participate in. Mm-hmm. So when we started in 2019, we started with like an interview series at first, and that transitioned into us just really just talking about horror movies in particular, and one specific horror movie based off of the theme of a night, which, or of a month, excuse me. And that actually happened by accident, the whole themes. That it started off with our very first month. I picked these movies at random. They so happened to all have something to do with possessions or ghosts or demons. And that was at random. And I went with that. I was like, okay, themes might be kind of cool for us to do. And it stuck and it worked, and it got people prepared to think for what the next month might be and what to potentially expect, and try to articulate of what's going to happen next on the show and all that great stuff. And that's been fun. It's been a fun way to involve our fans to participate on what the next month is going to be. What's that next wild month that's going to happen for us.
You've obviously had tons of guests on the show. My introduction to the show actually was when you interviewed Joseph and Vanessa Winters, the directors of Deadstream, which is an excellent movie. But kind of, what's it like getting to work with other horror content creators as well as like filmmakers? And then sort of, do you have like a dream guest that you hope to one day get on the show?
Okay, I'll start with the first aspect of that question. Joseph and Vanessa are also fantastic, really great humans. I didn't interview them, but my co-host did. But they're fantastic folks. Working with horror creators is probably why I do this. You know, like it's I love working with other people and getting other insights and things like that. You know, I personally like to see other people also shine. That's one of my favorite things, is seeing other people do a lot of cool shit. And when I'm seeing people do a lot of cool things, that's when I really want to kind of help them on that, help them, you know, go further in that aspect. So I love talking to horror creators, and I think horror creators are just a fascinating group of folks in general. And I like talking to folks who do like the TikTok route, and, you know, folks who are really popular on Twitter who focus on journalism and all that great stuff. But I also really enjoy talking to people who actually create horror as well. I mean, who doesn't, right? Who doesn't like have their that kind of that dream guest of that you would want on the show? Who doesn't want Stephen King on their show? Who doesn't want John Carpenter on their show? You know, so like, of course. So for us, I mean, in this space, we are fortunate enough to make friends with a lot of these people. And, you know, and I was fortunate enough to have my special guest, my very, I guess, my holy grail of all the guests that I've really wanted, which was Mike Flanagan. And we had Mike Flanagan on last year, and it was a great experience. We just really talked for like 45 minutes to an hour, just about everything. And it was a lot of fun to kind of pick his brain a little bit and talk to him, and also see like that whole concept of like, don't meet your heroes. Well, I was like really glad to meet my hero in that day.
On top, but one other question, sort of, well, two more questions about the podcast, really. So the podcast is award winning. And, you know, like, what are those awards? And then obviously, what does it feel like winning an award for like this show that you created?
Surreal. We won our first award back in 2021, and then we won another award in 2022. But in 2021, the award that we won was from Joe Bob Briggs, and it was our Silver Bolo Award, and we won it on. Gosh, it was a crazy night. My phone was blowing up, and I was knocked out. Like, I had a really long day on my day job, and I was so tired, and I just passed out that night. And I'm getting text messages from my co-host, text messages from people I don't even know who had my number. Like, it was crazy. And I finally woke up at like 6 a.m. or something like that to all these messages and all these Twitter messages and things like that. And then it was Shudder who sent me an email congratulating me and on the show and whatnot. And it was wild. It was a very surreal moment when we won that award. And I didn't even know how we won. It just happened. And I didn't see any posts on Twitter about like nominating or anything like that. It's just when I was talking to Darcy, she just loved every aspect of what we were doing with the show. And, you know, she kind of threw us in the running in the hat, and they chatted with their team, and everyone loved us. And that's kind of where it went from there. And I thought that was just really fucking cool. I was like, oh, okay. Like that's absolutely wild. And the other award wasn't necessarily for the show. It was technically for me. But it was because of the show, and it was 40 under 40 award that I got from my alma mater over in California State University of East Bay. And it was also surreal for them to kind of message me and just learn about all the stuff that I'm doing and whatnot as well with the show and with horror and in general. And that was also extremely surreal. We had a ceremony at my school, and I'm gonna date myself a little bit, although I have quite a bit already in our conversation. But I'm gonna date myself a little bit. I haven't been in college in almost 10 years, and for them to message me out of the blue and it's like, hey, like we've been seeing all the rounds you've been doing with your show, and we wanted to congratulate you on everything you're doing with the show. And I got 40 under 40, which was pretty much an award that for folks who are under the age of 40 who are doing significant things in society. And these are people who have made like biotech companies, and they've like one person found like some cure to some disease, and I'm just like, how am I what like I'm a guy talking about horror movies on the internet. Like that's literally all I'm doing. Like these people are in the process of damn near solving cancer, and I'm just talking about horror films. And you sure, like you sure you want me to accept this award? So yeah, it's surreal. It's absolutely surreal being able to achieve these awards with the show. And we've been doing it for 4 years now, and it's wild. It's wild to see how far it's come.
Horror movie recommendations, whether the fans or just people looking for a good scary movie, kind of what is your go-to recommendation? What's the film that you always cite as like, you should check this one out? This is like a solid watch.
Oh, you know what? Here we go. This is not body horror, surprise. But it's not body horror, but Dario Argento's Opera. Dario Argento's Opera to me it's a film that a lot of people haven't seen, but for me personally, it is Argento at his best. 1990, it's a very odd movie, which no surprises, it's Argento, but with this particular film, Opera, it has this really interesting aspect of a killer, where this killer is pretty much terrorizing this one person. And by terrorizing her, he's not trying to kill her. He's forcing her to watch him kill people that she loves. Mm-hmm. In every situation, where he'll tie her up and he forces her eyes open by taping pins at the bottom of her eyelids. So if she closes her eyes, it stabs her in her eyelid. Mm-hmm. And there's moments where you do see it happen. And it's intense. I mean, it's Italians and their eyeballs. They love them. But with that, they're the most brutal kills that you ever see. And it's so wild. And she's an opera singer. That's the whole point. Mm-hmm. That she's trying to do. I believe it's Macbeth. And she's this opera singer who is just being terrorized by this killer. And it is super metal. And as Argento loves his metal music, so of course he has to add that. We got the score from Goblin. We got like Iron Maiden in there. We got I think we even have Metallica in there as well. But like there's so many aspects of it just being just a very intense punch after punch after punch after punch, which has the best peephole scene you will ever witness in cinema. Mm-hmm. If you think Evil Dead Rise was good, this doesn't even come close. This has the best peephole scene you will ever see in your entire life. I'm not even kidding. It is so good, and it's so like ridiculously cinematic as well. I don't even want to give it away. I just want people to check out Opera. I believe it's on Tubi if you want us to check it out, but check out Opera. Oh my God. I mean, I want to watch it right now. I'm getting myself excited about this movie.
No, I mean...